Joining us right now is the director of the Eurasia Group Asia, Michael Hirson. Michael, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. What's your take on how the president is handling his trip in Asia? What are you looking at in terms of that will come out of this trip?
Well, I think, as you said, he's on message so far. And with North Korea, he's really looking to calibrate the tone here, because on the one hand, he wants to show that he's serious. But he's walking into his meetings with the Chinese president, and he wants to show the Chinese that he is willing to negotiate, because that's what China's ask is can't all be about threats from the Chinese perspective. But in China, look, really, President Trump has two big asks, North Korea and trade, and both of those are big. So it's going to be a tall order in terms of actually getting some real results from the Chinese.
What does China want? If we were looked at their list of priorities, what do they want?
Well, China's very happy with the status quo. Xi Jinping feels like he's on a great track. He just came out of a domestic political event where he got even more power. China feels like their influence is growing day by day. What they don't want is the U.S. to follow through with some of the tough measures on trade, on North Korea sanctions that the U.S. administration has been threatening. So President Xi is fine to just get through this with no gaffes. He looks great for his domestic media. He's playing to a Chinese audience that has state-run media that's going to show him as a skillful master of diplomacy, sitting down with President Trump as a true peer, as a global leader. He gets through this. They're not looking for any big asks here.
That's not going to be enough.
No, despite our mutually beneficial economic and trade relationship with China and Xi really want us ultimately out of Northeast Asia, do they not?
China would certainly like to be the unquestioned power in Asia. I don't think they want the U.S. to move too abruptly, right? A vacuum doesn't mean it's not like the U.S. pulls out, China just steps right in. What happens is the U.S. pulls out, Australia, India, Japan step forward. That's not necessarily good for China as well. So China would like to do this gradually, and I think they'd be very happy if...
Well, that's why they tolerate the threats from North Korea, correct? That's why that they kind of stand back and let North Korea threaten us and other players in the region.
Well, what China's afraid of is a collapse of the North Korean regime right on their doorstep, right? I mean, this is right on China's border. You think about how the U.S. views its security relationship with Mexico, for example, and the security threats that entails. For China, you've got a potentially unstable regime with nuclear weapons. China's afraid of a refugee crisis where you've got North Koreans pouring over China's borders. They're worried about Kim Jong-un taking rash actions. It's not just about the U.S. relationship. They're worried about something really going down very badly right on their doorstep.
What are the chances that China actually sticks with the sanctions, particularly the financial sanctions?
Well, I think the U.S. ultimately is going to be disappointed, and it really gets back to this dynamic. It's China's willing to increase incrementally the pressure on the North Korean regime, but they don't want to take the steps that the U.S. wants. What the U.S. wants is maximize economic leverage, cut off China's oil exports to North Korea, really threaten this regime with everything they've got so that they come to the negotiating table. China's willing to go some of the way, but not to the extent that it could threaten a collapse of the North Korean regime, because that's where you get back into a refugee crisis and some of these other deep concerns that China has.
What kind of deal flow are you expecting? When the president came back from his Mideast trip, he talked about hundreds of billions of dollars in deals. U.S. and Chinese firms have reportedly signed 20 deals worth $9 billion today alone. It's not clear which companies are involved in these deals, but this morning Ford announced a $750 million joint venture with a Chinese auto firm to develop electric vehicles in China. Are we slowly but surely seeing China open up its market to the U.S. or not?
No, I think this is really a short-term fix, and a lot of this is about optics, because the trade deals will look good, but what the President Trump really wants is deeper measures by China to open its markets. And strangely enough, that's not really on the agenda for this visit. He's going to deliver the message, but the U.S. administration has not been pushing for China to make those commitments on this trip. Sort of trade deals now, and we're going to talk about the tough stuff down the road. The problem is when you don't have an action-forcing event like these presidential visits, it's hard to get that leverage with China. It doesn't come every day. So this might be a missed opportunity from that perspective.
We've been so focused on North Korea and the imminent danger there. What about the South China Sea? Vietnam is obviously in a precarious position, proximity to China, a trading partner with the United States. How do you view the discussions regarding Vietnam and the South China Sea?
Well, that'll definitely be part of the message that President Trump delivers to the Chinese is, look, we need to see at least a freeze in terms of China's further construction of defense
But they're not
installations.
going to do that, are they? I mean, they've been on a tear developing and growing and taking over these islands and making artificial islands and calling them their own.
That's right. It might slow in pace, but they're not going to stop. But I think South China Sea, we're not in a position like North Korea. President Trump has decided North Korea is the most serious global threat the U.S. faces. He is focused on that and on trade. South China Sea is part of this picture, but the temperature on that issue is much cooler than it was, say, a year ago. So it'll be part of that discussion, not a central focus.
So in your opinion, what counts as a win for President Trump, for this administration, from this trip?
I think he'll want to see assurances from Xi that China's willing to do more on North Korea and a commitment by China to open its markets further.
Well, why wouldn't China do more to rein in North Korea? I mean, I understand that they don't want this refugee, they don't want a refugee crisis, but knowing the potential damage and a horrible situation that North Korea can create, why wouldn't China do more?
Well, they are doing a bit more. In fact, they've gone further than I think a lot of people were expecting, and it really is because of the pressure that the U.S. is putting on them. The problem is we're moving closer to those red lines. The U.S. wants to take that further step, and that's where China, that's where China's red line is. Collapse of the North Korean regime, very difficult situation for them. Look, this is a terrible situation for Beijing, too. They are very alarmed at the North Korean regime. It's not what they want to see. The problem is that what their worst option is one that leads to the collapse of the regime. So that they're also navigating a very difficult balance here.
We were talking about sanctions, Jason. You said, look, North Korea doesn't care about the sanctions. They don't care about its people. I mean, the Senate Banking Committee unanimously approved a bill that requires the Treasury to sanction banks that knowingly handle transactions with North Korea. The legislation does not name China directly, but Chinese banks manage most of Pyongyang's international accounts.
It's so funny to me. We say, oh, we're going to do sanctions, and then every time something gets hot again, we say, oh, well, we're going to ratchet it up. I don't know why we didn't just go to the maximum, but I also don't think they have any effect because I don't think the leader there cares about his people.
I think that's right. I think that's why there's real concern in the U.S. policy community that even this maximum pressure campaign that the U.S. is launching may not work. It's kind of a race right now between U.S. imposing sanctions and increasing that leverage and North Korea's missile program. And given, as you said, given how important this is to North Korea's leader, he views this as his guarantee of his survival. It looks like missiles might win ultimately.
But do you think Kim Jong-un's suicidal?
I don't think he's suicidal, but I think he views this ability to get this deterrent of a nuclear-enabled ICBM that could reach the U.S. as the card that he needs to secure his survival. Exactly.
What about, I know this is speculation, maybe not fair to ask, any indications, have you seen anything, or do you believe that the Chinese government has a succession plan in place, that they've thought that through?
We just don't, for North Korea.
For North Korea.
Very difficult to say. China has not been willing to have that kind of discussion with the U.S., even though the U.S. has tried. There's not, I think, that trust yet between Beijing and Washington to talk about what comes next if Kim Jong-un falls from power.
All right, we will leave it there. Michael, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael Hirson, joining us there.